Martha "Marty" Sullivan was quietly knitting in her living room, with the soft early summer sunlight of Minnesota streaming in. The serenity she'd cultivated over her 65 years of life was evident in her demeanor. However, this peaceful moment was abruptly shattered by the sudden ringing of the telephone. Picking up the receiver, she heard her son Nathan's voice. "Mom, can you come to the hospital right away? It's about Zoe." His voice was trembling. Marty's heart began to race. Upon arriving at the hospital, Nathan and his wife Vanessa were waiting in the lobby with tense expressions. While baby Zoe, just 1 month old, was undergoing tests, the family waited in anxious silence. When the doctor appeared, he quietly announced, "We've discovered that Zoe has a congenital brain disorder." Those words froze the air in the room. Vanessa was the first to react. "What do you mean? Are you saying our baby isn't normal?" Her voice was a mix of anger and fear. The doctor carefully continued his explanation. "It's a condition that may affect brain development. Early intervention and appropriate treatment will be crucial." Nathan collapsed into a chair. "What are we supposed to do now?" Tears glistened in his eyes. Marty took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "It'll be all right. We'll get through this together." However, her words didn't seem to reach Nathan and Vanessa's hearts. From that day on, the family atmosphere changed drastically. Nathan and Vanessa began to shirk their responsibilities in caring for Zoe, and often started arguments. "Why did this have to happen?" Vanessa cried out one night. "All I wanted was a normal baby." Nathan couldn't hide his irritation either. "We're not prepared to shoulder such a heavy burden." Marty, cradling her granddaughter, was pained by the young couple's words. "Zoe is our treasure. She's precious to us, even with her disability." But her words didn't resonate with the young couple. As they considered treatment options at Mayo Clinic, Nathan and Vanessa's attitudes grew increasingly cold. They refused to participate in treatment discussions and left Zoe's care entirely to Marty. "Nate, Vanessa, let's work together for Zoe's sake," Marty urged repeatedly. But their responses were always curt. One day, when Marty returned from shopping, she found Nathan and Vanessa packing their bags. "What's going on?" she asked, to which Nathan coldly replied, "We need a break." Feeling anxious, Marty said, "I understand. But please come back soon. Zoe needs her parents." After Nathan and Vanessa left, a heavy silence settled over the house. As Marty watched the sleeping Zoe, she couldn't help but feel anxious about the future. However, listening to her granddaughter's soft breathing, she steeled her resolve. "It's all right, Zoe. Grandma's here for you." Outside the window, the summer twilight in Minnesota gently enveloped the city. Marty quietly said a prayer, preparing for the difficult days ahead. The time had come to test the bonds of family. A week passed since Nate and Vanessa had left for their break. Marty had been waiting every day for a call or message from them, but the phone remained silent. One morning, Marty was startled awake by the sudden sound of the doorbell. When she opened the door, there stood Nate and Vanessa. However, their eyes lacked the warmth they once had. "Welcome back," Marty greeted them, but the two entered the house without a word. Vanessa headed straight for Zoe's room and picked up the baby. Marty felt relieved seeing this, but the next moment, she froze at Vanessa's words. "Nate, let's go." "Where are you going?" Marty asked, to which Nate coldly replied, "Just for a drive." Despite feeling uneasy, Marty saw them off. However, even after the car had driven away, a warning bell continued to ring in her heart. Time passed, the day grew late, but they didn't return. Growing anxious, Marty called Nate's cell phone several times, but there was no answer. As twilight fell, she finally heard the sound of a car. Marty sighed with relief as she headed to the door. However, what appeared before her were Nate and Vanessa without Zoe. "Where's Zoe?" Marty's voice trembled. Nate and Vanessa looked at each other, and then Nate spoke. "She's gone." "What do you mean?" The blood drained from Marty's face. Vanessa coldly declared, "We don't want this brat. We left her at the Lake Harriet campground." Marty couldn't believe her ears. "You're joking, right?" But there was no hint of jest in their expressions. "How could you do such a thing?" Marty cried out. Nate and Vanessa, expressionless, began to pack their bags. "Where are you going?" Marty demanded, to which Nate coldly answered, "We're not coming back. Goodbye, Mom." After they left, Marty was momentarily stunned before coming to her senses. "Zoe!" She quickly jumped into her car and headed for Lake Harriet. The day had completely darkened, and the surroundings were enveloped in darkness. Upon reaching the campground, Marty searched desperately with a flashlight in hand. "Zoe! Zoe!" From between the trees, she heard a faint cry. Marty moved towards the sound and finally found Zoe wrapped in a blanket at the base of a large tree. "Oh, thank goodness." Marty picked up Zoe with tears streaming down her face. However, her relief was short-lived as she noticed how cold Zoe's body was. "Hang in there, Zoe. Grandma's here for you." Marty quickly put Zoe in the car and headed for the hospital. On the way, she called the police to report Nate and Vanessa's actions. At the hospital, while the doctors treated Zoe, Marty continued to pray in the waiting room. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctor appeared. "Mrs. Sullivan, Zoe's life is out of danger. It's a good thing you found her so quickly." At those words, Marty nearly collapsed on the spot. The next day, she received a call from the police informing her that Nate and Vanessa had been detained at the airport. While harboring complex feelings, Marty decided to focus solely on Zoe for now. Holding Zoe in the hospital room, Marty made a vow. "I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Grandma will always protect you." Outside the window, the light of a new day was beginning to shine. The road ahead would be steep. However, Marty was determined to move forward, one step at a time, together with Zoe. Several weeks had passed since the terrifying incident at Lake Harriet. Marty sat across from the hospital's social worker, taking a deep breath. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you ready to become Zoe's guardian?" Marty answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll raise her." Nate and Vanessa had been charged with child abandonment and were awaiting trial. While anger and sadness swirled in Marty's heart, she knew she had to focus on Zoe, who was right in front of her. The guardianship process was more complex than she had anticipated. Mountains of paperwork, interviews, home visits. She could feel the concerned gazes of those around her, wondering if a 65-year-old woman could raise an infant. But Marty didn't give up. "I have the strength to make Zoe happy. I will certainly raise her well." Her words, filled with determination, made even the judge nod deeply. On the day she was officially recognized as Zoe's guardian, Marty hugged her granddaughter at the hospital. "Now, let's go home." Back home, a new reality awaited. A crib, diapers, formula. Marty hadn't imagined she'd be taking care of a baby again at 65. But every time she saw Zoe's smile, all her fatigue vanished. Visits to Children's Minnesota Hospital became routine. Neurology, physical therapy, speech therapy. Managing appointments alone was challenging, but Marty desperately kept up. "Mrs. Sullivan, you're doing very well," Dr. Johnson, the attending physician, said. "We're seeing good signs in Zoe's development." At those words, Marty felt tears welling up. "Thank you. I'll keep doing my best." However, not everything was smooth sailing. Preparing midnight bottles and dealing with seizures pushed her to her physical and mental limits at times. One day, Sarah, a 58-year-old former nurse living nearby, came to visit. "Marty, you look like you're having a tough time. Is there anything I can help with?" At first hesitant, Marty gradually began to accept help. Sarah would occasionally assist with Zoe's care, giving Marty some time to rest. The church community also became a big support. After Sunday Mass, many people would approach her. "Do you need anything? Is there anything we can do?" Marty slowly began to realize that she didn't have to shoulder everything alone. One day, Zoe called out, "Mama," for the first time. Marty's heart swelled with joy. "That's right, I'm Grandma," she replied, while feeling a twinge of loneliness. This was a moment that Nate and Vanessa should have experienced. However, such thoughts didn't linger long. Zoe's smile and daily growth gave new meaning to Marty's life. Sometimes, she was aware of the eyes around her. When she was with young mothers in the park, she felt out of place. But Marty held her head high. "We may be a different kind of family, but we're a family filled with love." A year passed, and Zoe's second birthday was approaching. Marty planned a small party. Sarah and friends from church gathered, and the house was filled with a warm atmosphere. As she watched Zoe blow out the candles on her cake, Marty thought, "Our journey has only just begun. But we can overcome anything together." That night, as she put Zoe to bed, Marty quietly vowed, "I'll make you happy, Zoe. Grandma will love you enough for both Mama and Papa." Outside the window, the Minnesota stars were shining. The story of this new kind of family was just beginning. But the bond between Marty and Zoe had the strength to overcome any difficulty. It was the true image of a family, transcending blood ties. 8 years had passed, and Zoe was now 10 years old. Marty had turned 75, but she felt fulfilled in her life with her granddaughter. Zoe's disability still affected her daily life, but the two were moving forward little by little. One day, after a regular checkup at Children's Minnesota Hospital, Dr. Johnson made a new suggestion. "Zoe, would you like to try art therapy? We can expect it to be effective as part of your rehabilitation." Zoe hesitated a bit, but Marty gently encouraged her. "Why don't you give it a try? Starting something new is always good." At the first session, Zoe nervously gripped the paintbrush. However, as she layered colors, Marty could see her expression gradually softening. When the session ended, Zoe shyly showed her painting to Marty. It was a colorful flower field. "Grandma, look!" Marty gasped. She felt that Zoe's painting contained something she couldn't express in words. "It's wonderful, Zoe." From then on, Zoe looked forward to art therapy every week. Her paintings gradually became more complex, and her use of color became richer. One day, Sarah, the art therapist, approached Marty. "Mrs. Sullivan, Zoe's talent is special. Her paintings show deep emotions and a unique perspective." At those words, Marty felt surprised and delighted. Zoe's paintings might be becoming a means of expressing her inner world. As Zoe's 11th birthday approached, she developed a high fever and had to be hospitalized. Watching Zoe lying quietly in the hospital room, Marty's heart ached. "Zoe, it's okay. You'll get better soon." When Marty spoke, Zoe smiled weakly. "Grandma, can you bring my painting supplies?" Marty rushed home and brought Zoe's art materials. For the next few days, Zoe continued to paint from her hospital bed. Her paintings had a depth that hadn't been there before. On the day of discharge, the hospital staff were surprised when they saw Zoe's paintings. "These are wonderful," said Jenny, a nurse. "Would you like to exhibit them at the Ronald McDonald House?" Ronald McDonald House is a facility for sick children and their families. Zoe's eyes lit up. "Really? Can I?" "Of course," Marty answered. "Let's show everyone Zoe's paintings." Preparing for the exhibition was a new challenge for Zoe. She seriously considered which paintings to choose and how to arrange them. On the day of the event, many people visited the small exhibition space. A 10-year-old child painted such amazing works. This use of color is professional level. Zoe smiled shyly but happily at the words of the visitors. Among those who came to see the exhibition was Lisa Stevens, a curator from the Walker Art Center. She spent a long time standing in front of Zoe's paintings. "Mrs. Sullivan," Lisa approached Marty. "Zoe's talent is wonderful. Would you like to exhibit at our Young Artists show?" At those words, Marty and Zoe were speechless with surprise. But Zoe's eyes were shining with expectation. "I want to do it," she answered immediately. That night, as they had dinner as a family, Marty was thinking about Zoe's future. Even with her disability, she could express herself through art. It felt like a new door of possibility had opened for Zoe. "Zoe, do you really want to pursue the path of art?" Marty asked. Zoe answered in a firm tone. Yes, I can express my feelings through painting. Plus, I can make people smile. Marty felt a warmth in her chest at her granddaughter's growth. Despite overcoming difficulties, Zoe was trying to find her own path. All right, Grandma will support you with all her might. When Marty said this, Zoe beamed with a full smile. Outside the window, the sunset was dyeing the city red. Looking at this beautiful scene, Marty thought, Zoe's life would surely shine as beautifully as this sunset. There would still be difficulties ahead. But with art as a new light, it would brightly illuminate their lives. Believing this, Marty and Zoe began preparing to take a new step forward. The day of Zoe's first solo exhibition at the Northrop King building had arrived. Marty was now 75 years old, but her heart swelled with pride at her granddaughter's success. Upon arriving at the venue, many people had already gathered. Art dealers and critics were casting eager glances at Zoe's works. As the opening ceremony began and Zoe stepped onto the stage to give her greeting, a commotion broke out at the entrance of the venue. Marty's eyes widened. Standing there were Nate and Vanessa, whom she hadn't seen in 10 years. As a silence that seemed to stop time enveloped the venue, Nate and Vanessa walked towards Zoe. Zoe. Nate called out. We've come back. Marty immediately stood in front of Zoe. Why have you come? Vanessa began to speak tearfully. We made a terrible mistake. But we truly regret it. We want to come back to the family. However, Zoe calmly replied, I knew you two would come. As the venue was wrapped in surprise, Zoe continued. Please look closely at my paintings. Especially the one in the center. Nate and Vanessa turned their eyes to the indicated painting. At first glance, it seemed to be a beautiful landscape, but upon closer inspection, unsettling elements were hidden within. Zoe began to explain matter-of-factly. This painting depicts the day you abandoned me. But that's not all. She pointed to a part of the painting. Do you see the numbers hidden here? This is the auction price of my latest work. Nate and Vanessa's faces tensed. Zoe continued, you suddenly appeared after my talent started to be recognized. That's not a coincidence, is it? Vanessa said in a trembling voice, that's not true, we really. But Zoe interrupted her. If you really wanted to come back to the family, why didn't you contact me before I became famous? Why didn't you help when Grandma and I were struggling? Nate and Vanessa were at a loss for words, standing stock still. Zoe calmly continued, my talent isn't for money. It's to overcome past pain and create a new future. And I already have a loving family. She smiled at Marty. If you truly want to make amends, you should start by filling in the 10-year gap. But if you came for the money, please leave now. After a moment of silence, the venue erupted in applause. Many people were moved by Zoe's courage and wisdom. Unable to withstand the cold stares from those around them, Nate and Vanessa hurriedly left the venue. Marty hugged Zoe, holding back tears. You've really grown strong. Zoe replied, it's thanks to you, Grandma. We're the strongest family." That night, under the starry sky visible from the windows of the Northrop King building, Marty and Zoe felt the beginning of a new chapter. Zoe had used her talent to face her past and overcome it. The two were prepared to overcome any difficulties with love and talent as their weapons. And they quietly felt that the events of this day would be a major turning point in their lives. After Nate and Vanessa left the venue, Zoe let out a deep breath. As the people around her watched over her, she began to speak quietly. "Those two are my parents. But they're also the people who abandoned me." As the venue held its breath, Zoe continued. "Today, I understood their true intentions. But strangely, I can't bring myself to completely reject them." Marty placed her hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, smiling encouragingly. "My works contain all my suffering and joy. Someday, I hope they can understand too." There was a hint of hope in Zoe's voice. She looked around the venue and said firmly, "Family bonds aren't easily repaired. But through art, I'll continue to express my feelings. That's the path I've chosen." Those words enveloped the entire venue in applause of admiration. After the exhibition, Marty and Zoe quietly headed home. In the car, Zoe suddenly said, "Grandma, was it okay that I didn't completely reject them?" Marty gently replied, "I'm proud of your decision. It's not an easy path, but this is your strength." A year passed since the exhibition. Zoe's talent blossomed further, and her works began to attract national attention. One day, as Marty was checking the mail, an unfamiliar envelope caught her eye. She gasped when she saw the sender. It was from Nate and Vanessa. Opening the letter together with Zoe, they found long words of apology and updates on the two's recent situation. It was clear that they had deeply understood their mistakes through Zoe's works and were sincerely reflecting. The letter stated that they had started volunteering at a local childcare center and were facing their problems by receiving counseling. After reading the letter, Zoe quietly said, "Grandma, I think I want to meet them." Later, the reunion with Nate and Vanessa was filled with tension and emotion. While it would still take time for complete reconciliation, they were able to take a small step forward. While carefully building a relationship with her parents, Zoe continued to cherish her strong bond with Marty. Her works, which wove in the complex story of her family, touched the hearts of many people. Marty, proud of her granddaughter's growth and strength, gradually accepted this new form of family. The theme of Zoe's next solo exhibition was rebirth. Her image of overcoming past pain and weaving new bonds gave hope to many people. Though the shape of the family had changed, Zoe embodied through her life and art that with love and understanding, any wound can be healed.